Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. In this quick lesson, I'm going to tell you about a really important legal English word, notwithstanding. Welcome back to my Study Legal English YouTube channel. I'm Louise and I'm here to help you improve your legal English. Before we get started, just a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button below this video to be notified every time I upload a new lesson. So now, let's get started. Notwithstanding, what is it? According to Brian Garner in Garner's Dictionary of Legal Usage, this preposition is an interesting word. In drafting, it commonly means despite, in spite of, or although. An example sentence using notwithstanding is, notwithstanding the economic problems, my client paid the invoice. What does that mean? It means that there were economic problems and therefore you might expect that the client would not be able to pay the invoice, but in contrast, the client did pay. The client paid. Another way of saying this is in spite of or despite economic problems, my client paid the invoice. Another way of saying it is, although there were economic problems, my client paid the invoice. So, how is it used? Let's look at that example sentence again. Notwithstanding the economic problems, my client paid the invoice. And let's think about this. What do you notice about that sentence? First of all, we use notwithstanding in sentences which have two parts. In grammar, we call these parts clauses. You can see that the sentence has two parts, right? Secondly, we use notwithstanding most commonly as a preposition at the start of the first clause, but it can be used at the start of the second clause. Thirdly, we use notwithstanding followed by a noun or a noun phrase. Okay. Next, we use a comma after the first clause. And finally, there is a contrasting relationship or an element of surprise between the first clause and the second clause. So, notwithstanding, should you learn it? We can talk about two things. Firstly, should you understand it? And secondly, should you use it? Let's look at should you understand it first of all. In my opinion, yes, you should understand it. If you are a lawyer, you may see it in real life, in contracts, judgments, and in legal writing. And if you're a student, you may need to learn it as part of your Legal English University course or for the test of legal English skills, the TOLS exam. Catherine Mason, the creator of the TOLS exam, includes a brief but good explanation of notwithstanding in Chapter 6A, Understanding Contracts, of her book, The Lawyer's English Language Coursebook. You can see that here on the right-hand side. She writes, notwithstanding means despite or in spite of something. For example, the new law concerning the protection of the environment will come into force next year, notwithstanding a huge amount of opposition to it from industry. The next step is, should you use it? Whether you use notwithstanding in your own writing or not is a matter of choice. Natasha Costello and I suggest using the alternative despite if you prefer plain English alternatives to legalese. And you can find that in Appendix B, Legalese to Plain English Quick Reference, in our book, Practical English Language Skills for Lawyers. Let's look now at some typical uses of notwithstanding, which I've adapted from real-life contracts and a judgment. Notwithstanding usage 1. Here we've got an example contract clause. Let's read it together. Clause 15.1. Notwithstanding the limitations of liability contained in clause 12.5, the parties remain fully liable for all direct losses arising from breach of confidentiality. What does this mean? This contract clause means that despite there being some limitations to liability in clause 12.5, we should imagine these limitations do not exist for breaches of confidentiality. And for those types of breaches, this clause, clause 15.1, will prevail, will take precedence. Let's look at usage 2. Here we've got another example contract clause. Clause 52.3. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary in this agreement, the contractor acknowledges that work permits are required for employing foreign personnel, and any refusal or inability to secure work permits shall not constitute force majeure. What does this mean? This contract clause means that even if other parts of the agreement state something different to this clause, for example, not getting a work permit constitutes a force majeure, in that situation, this clause will prevail. This clause is the most important. Let's look at usage 3. Here we have another example clause, clause 7.3. Notwithstanding the foregoing, the service provider shall be liable for hidden defects or construction defects. What does this mean? This contract clause means that even if other parts of the agreement before and only before this clause, if those parts imply something contrary to this clause, for example, that the service provider is not liable for any hidden defects or any construction defects, if we've got that written somewhere before this clause, we should ignore it because this clause will prevail. The service provider is liable, will be liable for any hidden defects or construction defects. Let's turn to usage 4. Here we've got an extract from a court judgment. It's been adapted for this video. It reads, "We are of the opinion that the licensee has the right to bring proceedings for infringement, notwithstanding the fact that the license had not been entered in the register." What does this mean? This means that even if the license has not been registered, and because it hasn't been registered, we may naturally expect that this would prevent the licensee from taking legal action. To the contrary, no, it's not like that. Instead, the licensee can take legal action. So, notwithstanding, what does Ken Adams say? Ken Adams deals with notwithstanding in points 13.631 to 13.637 in his book, A Manual of Style for Contract Drafting. In summary, he highlights 4 main problems of using notwithstanding in contracts. Firstly, he thinks that readers may take into account contract clauses as they're reading the contract, not realizing that later in the contract they are overridden by a notwithstanding clause. What does he mean? He means that you might read a contract clause and think, I have an obligation here, or I'm okay because if I don't get a work permit, it doesn't constitute a force majeure. And then later you forget to read the other clauses, but actually that clause that you thought had legal effect does not have legal effect because of this notwithstanding clause that says something different. Secondly, if the contract contains a notwithstanding anything in this agreement to the contrary clause, the reader must read every contract clause carefully to find which clauses are contrary to that notwithstanding clause. What does Ken mean? He means that when the wording is used, notwithstanding anything in this agreement to the contrary, or notwithstanding anything to the contrary within this agreement, if we find that, we don't have a specific clause to go and check. Whereas in the previous example, there was a reference to another clause, clause 12.5, conflicting with clause 15.2. Here, where there's no specific clause reference, it makes it very difficult for the reader. Thirdly, if multiple contract clauses within the agreement use notwithstanding, the reader may be confused about which clause prevails, because you might have one clause including notwithstanding, another clause including notwithstanding, and it becomes very confusing for the reader which clause is taking precedence. Finally, his fourth problem with notwithstanding is that if we use notwithstanding the foregoing, this phrase is ambiguous. The foregoing is ambiguous. Foregoing could refer to the immediately preceding sentence, so the directly before sentence. It could refer to an entire section, an entire clause, or the entire prior contract body, all of the contract before the phrase notwithstanding the foregoing. And so we know that when there's ambiguity within a contract, that can cause conflicts between parties and misunderstandings. So hopefully now you can understand notwithstanding, and whether you use it or not is your choice. So that brings us to the end of this lesson. I hope you found it useful. I hope you learned something new. If there are any legal English topics that I can help you with, let me know in the comments below. I'll try my best to cover those in future lessons. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and join me on social media for more legal English lessons. If you liked this lesson, hit the like button and share it with a friend or colleague. It really helps me to grow my channel. After watching this video, you might be interested in my other episodes related to contracts. You can check those episodes out here. So thanks a lot for watching and see you next time.